It does make your heart beat fast sometimes when you're driving or biking this road, but it is truly a national treasure for our country.
Today on This American Land. It's hard to believe that this kind of serenity is literally minutes away from downtown Washington, D.C. This wildlife preserve has incredible bird watching and scenery, and a very colorful past.
This needs to change, and what we need to see is this lush, living plant cover year-round.
10,000 years of growing domestic crops. Is agriculture in need of a major overhaul? And meet the Lord of the Tree Rings.
The climate history encoded in the annual rings of trees is unique. It's like fingerprinting.
All this and more, now on This American Land. Funding for This American Land is provided by the Weiss Foundation, the Turner Foundation, the Daniel K. Thorne Foundation, the Pew Charitable Trusts.
Welcome to This American Land. I'm Caroline Ravel.
And I'm Bruce Burkhart. On our show, you'll see some stories that you won't find in many other places. We'll take you to some beautiful landscapes that you may never have heard of, and we'll do something more. Bring you thoughtful stories about protecting America's natural resources.
Our first story from Montana shows you how a lot of different groups of people put their heads together to find a way to protect the habitat of grizzly bears, elk, and countless other species. Here's Gary Stryker.
I'm going to a left front track. I'm going to go to that. That's a big stride. That's a big male bear.
A spring snowstorm the night before has blanketed Montana's Swan Valley, south of Glacier National Park.
Were they fresh, the wolves?
For expert wildlife tracker Tom Parker, conditions couldn't be better. Before noon, his party finds prints left by grizzlies, wolves, elk, deer, and other wildlife. But their biggest find...
You can see there's one of the kittens walking, there's one actually bounding right there.
5 sets of tracks with what looks to be a healthy 90-pound adult mountain lion. It's the most offspring he's ever seen with one mother in more than 30 years of tracking lions.
This is an amazing little find, I have to tell you.
For Parker, a hunting guide who works with researchers and teaches tracking, all the evidence in the snow shows just how rich this habitat is for wildlife, and why he and others worked to keep this forest from being carved into real estate. Beginning in the late 1990s, Plum Creek Timber Company, the largest private landowner in Montana, started putting its timberland on the real estate market.
We knew that because we do have this extensive private land checkerboarded throughout our forested landscape, that was a huge threat, and that real estate values and real estate demand was just skyrocketing.
The federal government gave millions of western acres to private companies to finance railroads. Historically, the lands were used for logging and open to the public.
But when it really got problematic was when the corporate timber companies began going more into the real estate business and selling the land out of the timber base and into real estate.
Building lots of high-end homes here, deep in the forest, could block wildlife movement, recreation, and logging, and natural processes such as fire. Community conservation groups soon found they were outpaced in their efforts to preserve wildlife habitat and other forest values. So the Nature Conservancy and Trust for Public Land stepped in with the Montana Legacy Project, negotiating a bulk purchase with help from Congress and the state. They agreed to buy more than 310,000 acres from Plum Creek, including 67,000 acres here. Ringed by wilderness areas, the Swan Valley provides rich, low-elevation habitat for many sensitive species. The deal will cost $490 million, the largest single conservation purchase in U.S. history.
So for our values as a conservation organization, this is globally significant work.
The groups are selling 112,000 of those acres to the U.S. Forest Service for $250 million to make the land public and erase the checkerboard.
It'll help preserve the valley, more or less a natural state. And I think if it's administered properly, I think there will be work for people, for the loggers, if it's for the thinning of the forest, and I think it'll be just self-productive.
As you're looking here, you can see that the hind foot is registering in front of the front foot.
The grizzly track marches through one of the purchased parcels that is now national forest, public land.
It was actually planned to be a development right there. And the more development you disperse out here, the higher the likelihood of conflict with these animals.
If not for the buyout, he says, this bear's backyard would be someone else's home. For This American Land, I'm Gary Stryker.
The mountain lion, also known as a puma, cougar, and ghost cat, does not like to share its territory. Only a few of these big cats can survive in a 30-square-mile range. Once found throughout the Western Hemisphere, these animals have been eliminated in most of their native habitat.
The Land Institute in Salina, Kansas started out as a school to help kids reconnect with nature, but it's grown into a facility that's trying to revolutionize agriculture.
Part of its mission is to change the way that crops are grown so that it's much more productive and patterned on the way that nature's ecosystem works. Our story is from Kansas City Public Television.
Agriculture has been identified as the #1 cause of wildlife species losses around the world. As we take out the natural plant communities dominated by perennials, convert them for agricultural lands, species go extinct, our nutrient cycles are disrupted, and so forth. This is one of the most unnatural conditions for landscapes around the world. There's no living vegetation really to protect the soil, no plants collecting sunlight, just dead plant material left on the soil surface, no living roots to collect water, to collect nutrients. In meeting our big challenge of transforming soil into flesh over the next 50 to 100 years, this needs to change. And what we need to see in the future from our crops is this lush, living plant cover year-round. These are the future way in which we'll transform soil into flesh.
The way we got the high-yielding crops we have today was that professional plant breeders for a century or so have been selecting plants that put more of their weight into reproductive growth, that is seed, and less of it into stems, leaves, and other stuff that we don't eat. Because perennials have a higher potential to produce more above-ground mass, if we can get 40–50% of that into food, we could actually have higher yields.
Several of my colleagues essentially told me that, you know, this is nuts, that perennialism and high seed yield can't go together. Well, I think we can rather boldly state now that in the longer run, perennials will out-yield monocultures.
It's not magical, it's actually difficult. And it will take a decade or two of work, but it's doable, and it will have a huge impact on, not only the health of your food, but the health of the land, and the health of the planet that your children are going to live on.
So that's why the plant breeders here at the Land Institute and our colleagues around the world are working to develop these perennial grain crops that produce the kinds of food and in the amounts that our current agricultural systems do, but in a way much more like our natural plant communities. This is a wild perennial relative of wheat. It's one of many crops that we're working with: rice, corn, sorghum, sunflowers. Above ground, these perennial grain crops can look very much like any other crop that farmers grow. From my point of view, though, as a soil scientist, I'm very interested in what this plant has to offer below ground. This is a very elegant micromanager of nutrients, water, and a terrific harvester of sunlight. Very fine, textured, and deep. This is about 10 feet long or more, and these are able to serve as very elegant safety nets to capture nutrients and capture water. If water falls on the landscape and runs off because there aren't plants there to capture it, or it percolates down through the soil, drains down below the root systems of our annual crops, it's essentially lost in terms of plant productivity. So we believe that we can get more productive crops by managing these nutrients, managing the water, and that allows the plant to be more productive with fewer inputs from the farmer.
Perennialism is a way of life. So we, as part of an ecosystem, would be devoted to moving agriculture from an extractive economy to a renewable economy. I think it's important to say out loud that the problem is growth. The growth of population and the growth of the economy. And I think if we were to say, okay, we are going to be the first species to practice restraint, and put it in that kind of a language, so we can think about that long history of how we have come to this place, rather than to simply burn it up and finally begin to live within our means on the only place that we're going to live.
Research by the Land Institute shows perennial grains may slow the degradation of cropland, as well as provide greater food security in the face of ever harsher climates.
Some of the twists and turns on one road in the Colorado National Monument could make an amusement park ride look tame.
But is a park like this the right place for a Tour de France-style bike race? Grab your helmet. Gary Stryker has our story.
Dizzying views and blasted tunnels show the hard manual labor and engineering skill that it took to build this awe-inspiring drive.
It's 23 miles long with just some incredibly breathtaking curves and rises and twists and turns. It does make your heart beat fast sometimes when you're driving or biking this road, but it is truly a national treasure for our country.
Built during the Great Depression with shovels and picks, when government programs put the unemployed to work on such large-scale projects, Rimrock Drive retains its rugged, historic character. It's a thrilling ride for cyclists like Jamie Lummis.
When I first came to Grand Junction, I didn't know what the Colorado National Monument was. I thought it was a statue. When I started to learn that it's actually a unit of the Park Service, how I learned that was I went for a ride.
Now Lummis does the popular ride once a week in summer.
It's a great ride, lots of steep climbing at first, and then really very tranquil, quiet, beautiful canyon setting.
But even more thrilling for him was watching professional cyclists rocket through the monument in the 1980s, when Grand Junction was a stage in a Tour de France-style race before the national tour ended.
You know, if I'm on a good day, I'm going 9 miles an hour. These guys are going up, twice that and even faster, and it's just really awesome to see that power.
When plans to revive stage racing in Colorado were announced, Lummis and others formed a committee to bring a stage of the new race here. But the centerpiece of their proposal, laps through the monument, didn't sit well with the National Park Service.
It might not seem like a whole lot, but when you're bringing in an entourage of elite racers, probably 150, 160 racers, and then another 160 teams worth of automobiles, motorcycles, helicopters, airplanes, and stacking people along the edges of this road, the impacts are too great, even just for one day.
For part of that day, the race would have closed the monument to regular visitors.
And if you were a visitor, say, coming from California or coming from the East Coast, and part of your destination was Colorado National Monument, and you happened to land here on the day that the park was closed for a commercial race, I guarantee you that the public would be very upset about that.
And now we need to check our map and see what the next plant is.
Many national monuments are managed like national parks, and officials say their policies today don't allow this type of commercial sporting event.
We are guided by those management policies, which are a reflection of our law and a reflection of our mission: protect the resources entrusted to our care and serve the visiting public.
Each year, more than 14,000 individual cyclists and recreational cycling tours enjoy the monument. But for the USA Pro Cycling Challenge, racers will have to go around it. For This American Land, I'm Gary Stryker.
Colorado National Monument is located among rock layers that are nearly 2 billion years old, almost half the age of the Earth.
In elementary school, most of us learned that trees can be very good calendars. Just count the number of rings in their trunk and you know how old they are.
But those same rings can do more than reveal a tree's age. They can help scientists plan for rain, drought, even fire. And they can solve some of history's mysteries.
Miles O'Brien has the details in the Science Nation report.
You might call him Lord of the Rings.
The Tree Ring Lab is hands-on, and so we encourage everybody to touch these pieces of wood. This is a cross-section of a redwood tree.
David Staley is a dendrochronologist at the University of Arkansas.
The annual growth rings in trees are a natural archive of environmental history. The time series history of fat rings and skinny rings is telling you about the history of wet years and dry years. So this is a piece of African bloodwood. This was found in western Zimbabwe.
Long before high-tech weather instruments, nature has kept precise records of rain, drought, even fires.
And so this particular piece of wood dates from 301 AD out to 1083 AD, so 700 years of the first millennium. And it's showing the formation of fire scars. And so when this was a young tree, this tree got scorched by a fire, and it took 1, 2, 3, 4 years for the wound response of the tree to close that wound shut. The climate history encoded in the annual rings of trees is unique. It's like fingerprinting.
With support from the National Science Foundation, Staley is helping Mexico prepare for future droughts by looking at how trees responded to severe drought in the past. That will help fine-tune predictions about how future dry spells will impact the ecosystem and could help the country prepare for future water and energy needs.
Is that this 21st century drought may be being aggravated by human activity, both at the global scale and at the regional scale due to land surface changes.
Deciphering tree rings can also help historians solve mysteries, like the fate of the New World's lost colony of Roanoke. Could drought have been a factor?
This is a piece of bald cypress from Blackwater River, Virginia. That is the most severe drought of 800 years in this part of the United States. And that's a significant year because of the disappearance of Virginia Dare and the other colonists at the Roanoke colony in North Carolina. Well, this is a Swedish increment borer, and with this tool we can extract a core sample without seriously harming the tree. And we bring them back to the laboratory and then carefully retrieve the core out of each straw and mount it carefully on the wood with the proper orientation of the xylem cells and glue them in. And once glued, then we take them to the shop and sand the cores, and then we can examine the tree rings under the microscope.
In the field, Staley and his team target old-growth forests with the least imprint of human activity.
Oh man, these are stupendous trees. They're so precious.
And that's a ringing endorsement from this Lord of the Rings. For Science Nation, I'm Miles O'Brien.
Leonardo da Vinci was the first to document that tree rings not only revealed age, but also information about environmental conditions.
When you think of the treasures in our nation's capital, stately buildings like the Lincoln Memorial or perhaps the Smithsonian come to mind.
We've discovered a somewhat hidden gem just a few minutes from downtown Washington. The Dyke Marsh Wildlife Preserve is an oasis for hikers, bird watchers, and anybody who just wants to soak in some nature.
That's a marsh wren actually singing over there right now. That bubbly, warbly, rattly noise, there, right there, that's the marsh wren.
A few miles from our nation's capital, Dyke Marsh Wildlife Preserve is a hidden gem on the Potomac River, just south of Alexandria, Virginia.
Hunter and I walk here a lot, probably 4 times a week.
Local residents love the trails.
Such a large marsh with a lot of diverse plant life and animals, and I don't think people know much about it. I didn't know about it till we moved into the neighborhood. It's very peaceful and you can't hear the traffic.
I think the waterfowl's nests that you see are very, very interesting, and the different birds flying around that you don't see in your backyard.
Yeah, it's just a wonderful place for people to live near such a large urban area like Washington, D.C., to be able to come out here and recreate in a natural area and be able to see things like marsh wrens and least bitterns and great blue herons and ospreys and occasional bald eagle. Yeah, if you just had a scope or something and you just...
Brent Story is a National Park Service biologist, always educating visitors about protecting this fragile natural resource.
We have about 285 species of birds that we've documented. There's many other species of wildlife that Dyke Marsh protects too, reptiles, amphibians. There's many species of turtles, many species of fish. We have 2 kinds of crows, the American crow and the fish crow. They're pretty hard to tell apart unless they sing. The American crow has the typical crow-like call, the caw, caw, caw. But the fish crow is kind of sounds like a sick crow, and it's more like a There's a beaver. It was a beaver. There's a beaver right there. Beavers, muskrats, occasionally an otter. Largemouth bass is the most popular species, but you get white perch, yellow perch, crappie, bluegill.
Dyke Marsh does get its name from dikes, dams to hold back water, essentially. That comes much later than the Native American history. The Native Americans would have mostly vacated this area around 1680. Now, the dikes were built probably in the early 1800s.
But Sheridan says the dikes to create grazing land were expensive to maintain and soon abandoned. Throughout the years, this hideaway has had a rich, sometimes raucous history, including moonshining, gambling, and prostitution.
For a time, it was actually called the Hellhole. Pretty much all of the 1800s, probably about the first half of the 20th century as well, there was a lot of illicit activity that took place on the water of the Potomac River. There were these small, shallow draft boats called arks, and folks would use them for illicit activities of all kinds. However, prostitution was a very large one. There would be ladies, enterprising ladies, who would come out and use these boats as ways to escape the eyes of law enforcement.
It wasn't debauchery, but development later in the 20th century that has ravaged this urban oasis. Dredging for sand and gravel destroyed 100 acres between 1932 and 1972.
Those are remnants of those dredging operations. One of the most important things that they mined was a promontory, like a peninsula, that jutted out into the Potomac River at the south end of the marsh. And that was the very first thing they mined back in the 1930s. And unfortunately, that was also one of the most important aspects of the marsh, because we get very strong storms during hurricane seasons that track up the Potomac River. And without that promontory there, the full force of those storms were just released on the marsh and caused a lot of erosion in the marsh.
While legislation in 1959 set the area aside as an irreplaceable wetland, erosion continues to steal almost an acre a year. Story says restoration is essential.
Absolutely. We can restore Dyke Marsh and have enough input from engineers to know that it is definitely feasible. Then we need the funds to be able to do it.
Volunteers in the group Friends of Dyke Marsh work to protect the area from pollution, poaching, and development. They lead bird walks and partner with the Park Service to enhance the ecosystem.
These marshes are very important nursery habitats for fisheries. All the fish will come up here to have their nests, and the young take refuge back in the marsh and develop into larger fish. So for the health of the Potomac in general, and for anybody who likes to fish on the Potomac River, they should strongly support the restoration of Dyke Marsh.
And he has advice for nature lovers, wherever they live.
If you have a natural area, you want to protect it. Once it gets disturbed, it's incredibly difficult to restore. So value and protect the natural systems that you currently have so that you don't have to get to the point where you're looking for funding to try and restore them. And the process of restoration is not an easy one.
But it is an important goal for bird watchers, nature photographers, and others who value this natural beauty. For This American Land, I'm Marcia Walton.
One of the stories we're working on for an upcoming show.
Good grief. Holy moly, Doc.
Fly fishing is almost a spiritual experience for some people. They really care about clean water.
Let him out.
Thanks for joining us for This American Land. You can count on us to bring you original stories on important issues affecting our natural landscapes, waters, and wildlife.
We'll see you next time.
For more information about this program, visit thisamericanland.org. Funding for This American Land is provided by the Weiss Foundation, the Turner Foundation, the Daniel K. Thorne Foundation, the Pew Charitable Trust, It's hard to believe that this kind of serenity is literally minutes away from downtown Washington, D.C. 10,000 years of growing domestic crops. Is agriculture in need of a major overhaul? And meet the Lord of the Tree Rings. All this and more on This American Land.